History books tell us that the ancient Greeks and Romans conquered the world with swords, marble, and simple pulleys. We remember them for their aqueducts, their Colosseum, and their statues. So, how is it then that before Julius Caesar was even born, they built an analog computer that could predict the movement of the planets and forecast solar eclipses down to the very hour? This is the story of a 2,000-year-old contradiction. And it all began with one man's scream at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. This is the Enigma archives. The year is 1900. October. A sponge diving boat, captained by Dimitrios Kontos, is off its course. A violent storm forces them to take shelter on the small, rocky island of Antikythera. They are stranded there for weeks. When the storm finally subsides on November 4th, 1900, Captain Kontos, desperate to make up for lost time, orders his divers to make a test dive. One of the divers is Elias Stadiatos. In that era, diving was a deadly gamble. There were no modern scuba tanks, just a heavy, brass-helmeted suit with limited mobility, fed by a primitive air pump from the surface. Stadiatos commits himself to the cold darkness of the sea. 45 meters, 50 meters. He descends to 52 meters. The seabed at that depth is near pitch black. He turns on his lantern, and the blood freezes in his veins at what he sees. He frantically yanks on the rope connecting him to the surface. They haul him onto the deck. When they remove his helmet, Stadiatos' face is a mask of terror. He screams again and again. Corpses! They're there. A pile of rotting horses and naked women. Captain Kontos is certain his diver is hallucinating from nitrogen narcosis, the rapture of the deep. He tries to calm him, but Stadiatos is insistent. To be certain, the captain dons the suit himself and descends into that ominous depth. When Kontos' lantern illuminates the pile of corpses that Stadiatos saw, his breath catches in his throat. They are not corpses. They are bronze and marble statues, calcified and scattered across the seafloor. The massive head of a horse, the body of a gladiator, statues of gods and goddesses, all the remains of an ancient Roman shipwreck. What they had found was not a graveyard, but a treasure. What the divers had found was one of the greatest underwater treasures in history. But hidden within that wreck was a secret more valuable than all the statues and gold. A calcified, rusted lump of metal that no one noticed at the time. An object that would rewrite human history and shatter the 2,000-year-old understanding of our own past. When news of this incredible discovery reached Athens, the Greek government immediately launched a salvage operation. This was the first major underwater archaeological excavation in history, and it was a complete disaster. The operation, lasting through the winter of 1900 to 1901, was unimaginably dangerous by modern standards. The divers could only stay at that freezing depth for 5 minutes at a time, twice a day. In the process, one diver died from the bends. 2 more were paralyzed for life. These heroes sacrificed their lives to recover priceless works of art. Every piece brought to the deck was sent to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, and along with them, a shapeless, rusted lump of rock, broken into 3 main pieces, was hauled up and sent to storage. At first, no one cared about it. It looked insignificant next to the majestic philosopher's head, or the Antikythera Mechanism. It was no different from a rock. The object sat in this warehouse, largely forgotten for 70 years, until May of 1902, when an archaeologist named Valerios Stais was cleaning the artifacts. He noticed something. The The calcified, rusted shell had cracked open in one spot, and inside that crack, something glinted that should not be in a rock. A gear wheel. Precisely cut triangular teeth. This was not a rock. This was a complex mechanism. When Stiles published his findings, the scientific world ignored him. The wreck it came from was dated to the 1st century BC, about 2,000 years ago. In that era, such technology should not exist. To understand this, we must visualize the technological level of the 1st century BC. This was the time of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra. Rome was conquering the world with swords, sandals, and simple pulleys. Their most advanced technologies were aqueducts, roads, and catapults. Complex, miniature, precision gearing. This was 1,500 years before Leonardo da Vinci's astronomical clocks. The first reaction from academics was that this must be a modern object. They claimed it must have been a 17th century nautical clock that fell onto the ancient wreck later. This was a classic OOPArt, an out-of-place artifact. It did not belong there. The object was so fragile and technology so primitive that studying it was nearly impossible. The mechanism sat in the museum depot for decades more, labelled as an incomprehensible anomaly guarding its secret. It would take a 20th century genius to unlock the mystery. In the 1950s, a British science historian and physicist at Yale University named Derek de Solla Price became obsessed with the mechanism. Price was convinced this was not a simple clock or a meaningless lump of metal, but something far more profound. He spent years studying the 82 small calcified fragments in the Athens Museum. In 1971, Price took a revolutionary step. He convinced Greek archaeological authorities to scan the fragments using X-rays and gamma rays. He saw what no one had seen until that day. Beneath the layers of calcification lay a system of at least 30 different bronze gear wheels, interlocked with incredible precision. It was no different from the internal mechanics of a modern Swiss watch. In fact, it was even more complex. Price's paper in 1974, Gears from the Greeks, shook the scientific world. He proposed that the mechanism was an analog computer used to predict the positions of planets and, astonishingly, solar and lunar eclipses. But the scientific community of the time rejected this claim as fantastical. The idea that ancient Greeks could build such a thing was contrary to the accepted understanding of history. Price was dismissed as a crank. His theory was not fully accepted before his death in 1983. Derek de Solla Price became a tragic hero, a man who saw truth far ahead of his time, but died before he could prove it. It would take 21st century technology to finally prove Price right. In 2005, an international team called the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project brought in a far more powerful technology. Engineers from HP and X-Tech Systems built a custom 8-ton 3D X-ray, computer tomography, scanner called the Blade Runner. This machine would scan the object slice by slice, revealing the exact location of every gear, every tooth count, and, most importantly, the thousands of characters of the ancient Greek user manual inscribed on the fragments. The results were even more staggering than Derek de Solla Price had imagined. The team could not only see the gears, they could read the text. This was no longer a theory, it was a fact. The mechanism was a hand-crank device, housed in a wooden box about the size of a shoebox. The front dial showed the position of the sun and moon in the sky. The back held far more complex secrets. So, what exactly did this 2,000-year-old computer do? It was a miniature of the universe. It was the cosmos in a box. One The front dial showed the sun's position in the zodiac on the 365-day Egyptian calendar. 2. The same dial had a small rotating sphere that showed the phases of the moon. 3. It had a complex system for tracking the 5 known planets of the time: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. 4. On the back, a spiral dial displayed the 19-year Metonic cycle used to synchronize the lunar calendar with the solar calendar. 5. And most astonishing of all, the lower back dial was a spiral that displayed the 223-month Saros cycle, which was used to predict solar and lunar eclipses. This dial didn't just show that an eclipse would happen, it showed what month, day, and even what hour it would occur. This was pure mathematical genius, based on data from Babylonian astronomy, dating back to 150 BC. The mechanism was proof of how deeply the ancient Greeks understood the cosmos. It even had an ingenious differential gear system, 2 gears connected by a pin, to account for the subtle wobbles, the speeding up and slowing down of the moon's orbit. This was a technology that would not be seen again until it was reinvented by 16th century clockmakers. But there was one more detail. One of the dials also showed a 4-year cycle, a calendar indicating when the Olympic Games and other major festivals like the Nemean, Isthmian, and Pythian Games were to be held. This proved it was not just a sophisticated scientific tool, but also a priceless social tool, demonstrating the social status and cultural knowledge of its wealthy Greek owner. Who built this masterpiece? The inscriptions don't give us a name, but the ship's route, likely from Ephesus or Pergamon to Rome, and its luxury cargo suggest it was a Roman loot or trade ship that sank around 70 to 60 BC. What about the maker? Experts believe the language and astronomical references on the mechanism point to Rhodes, the home of the great astronomer Hipparchus. Hipparchus is known as the father of astronomy and was the first to calculate the eclipse cycles. Another strong candidate is Hipparchus's student, the Stoic philosopher Posidonius. The great Roman orator Cicero writes that he visited Posidonius in Rhodes in 78 BC and saw him demonstrate a sphere that imitated the motions of the sun, moon, and 5 planets. This is an exact description of our mechanism. Perhaps this was a custom-ordered piece, destined for a wealthy Roman aristocrat like Julius Caesar himself. This brings us to the largest and most tragic mystery. What happened to this incredible technology? Why is the Antikythera Mechanism the only one of its kind? Why did this level of mechanical knowledge disappear, never to reappear for another 1,500 years? The evidence suggests this was not the work of a lone genius. The inscriptions on it contain corrections, as if made by different craftsmen. This implies it was part of a production tradition, a school of thought. The most likely answer is that this knowledge was lost. We like to think of history as a linear progression, from cavemen to the moon landing, but Antikythera is a painful reminder that history is full of peaks and deep valleys. The collapse of the Roman Empire destroyed the stable social order, the wealthy patrons, and, most importantly, the schools that housed this knowledge. Perhaps the greatest blow was events like the burning of the Library of Alexandria. The astronomical and mathematical knowledge required to build this mechanism was stored in texts accumulated over generations. When those texts burned, it wasn't just paper that was lost, but the collective memory of humanity. Precision mechanical knowledge was replaced by more immediate skills of survival. The engineering marvels of the ancient world would not be repeated for over a millennium. Today, research continues at the Antikythera wreck. Since 2012, international teams, including Jacques Cousteau's grandson, Fabien Cousteau, have been rescanning the seabed with modern technology, exosuit dive gear, ROVs. And they are making new finds: bones, missing pieces of statues, and more ceramics. The team hopes to find the missing pieces of the mechanism, or perhaps even another one. This ship, sent to the bottom of the sea by a storm 2,000 years ago, is not finished giving up its secrets. The Antikythera Mechanism is not an anomaly, it is a survivor. It is a painful piece of proof, showing us not only how high we once climbed, but just how far we fell. This 2,000-year-old analog computer was a reflection of an ancient, brilliant mind. But do you think this was the work of a single genius, like Archimedes, or the last surviving example of a sophisticated engineering tradition, erased from history? And more importantly, what other secrets are still lying in that wreck, or in others, that we are not yet ready to understand? Share your theories in the comments. Until the next investigation from the Enigma archives, keep questioning.